let me introduce you, Chris. I'm just going to read something from your bio here, if that's all right.
Sure.
Mr. Christopher Ellinghaus is a managing director and senior research analyst at Sieber Williams Shank & Co., formerly the Williams Capital Group. Prior to rejoining the firm, Mr. Ellinghaus served as a security analyst with Wellington Shields & Co. Previously, he was employed as a senior vice president and security analyst at Shields & Company. Before that, Mr. Ellinghaus was vice president of the institutional research department at Wall Street Access. Earlier, he served as a principal, director of research, and a senior security analyst with the Williams Group. Prior to that, Mr. Ellinghaus was employed as an associate analyst at Salomon Smith Barney. Previously, he was an associate analyst at Deutsche Bank, Alex Brown. Before that, Mr. Ellinghaus served as an analyst with NatWest Markets and Dean Witter Reynolds, and he began his investment career in 1982. Chris, thank you for joining us today. We look forward to hearing from you, and take it away.
Thank you, Chairman and Commissioners, for having me. As you read that goes back a very, very long way. I've been doing one form of this job or another for about 30 years now. I thought I'd throw on my my one and only plaid shirt for the meeting today, maybe to try to join the Montana aesthetic just a little bit. I thought I'm not 100% sure what you'd like to discuss or have a conversation about, but I made some fairly simple slides with some talking points to talk about a number of issues that are of interest to me, and I think probably to you as well. Feel free to interject or stop me at any point along the way so we can have a conversation. I thought I'd start talking about what I do. I understand you've already heard from a credit rating agency about what they do. They're parallel to what we do, but not necessarily with the same issues in mind all the time. Basically, what I do is I follow companies, which means a broad range of things. I analyze their financial performance. I listen to what they say. I read a great deal about them. I follow news. I watch commission meetings. I read regulatory filings. It's a wide range. I'm trying to accumulate whatever information we think might be pertinent to the decision of whether a stock is of value and what that value is. Part of what we do is try to evaluate what we feel the value of a stock is, and we transmit that information via reports to institutional clients. These would be mutual funds, hedge funds, pension funds, the people that buy stocks for various investment purposes. So that would cover a wide range of types of investors. And we advise them on what we think stocks are worth and whether it should be purchased. Is it going to provide them with the kind of return that they are looking for? So really what we're in the business of doing is collecting that information to make the best possible recommendation and then come up with the most complete valuation for a stock. That may be a little bit different than what a rating agency does or what a fixed income analysts would do. They are looking more at default risk and whether a particular bond is providing an adequate yield, things of that sort, but not entirely different. So that's basically what we do. You know what? I have started without putting our slides up. So let me try it. Oh, I do not, Philip, if you're still there, I do not have share screen capabilities, or we could put
Mr. Ellinghaus,
Yep.
Just before you pass on from
Sure.
that, who are your clients?
Well, they would range from people like T. Rowe Price or Fidelity or those types of large mutual funds to, State Pension Fund of New York or Montana, or hedge funds is another class of investors. Those are are private funds that have much smaller investor bases, but a lot of concentrated money. They act a little differently than, say, T. Rowe Price or a pension fund would. But basically, anyone in the equity market that owns or purchases stocks. So we try to advise them as to what they should do. And of course, they have a huge group of individuals like myself at different investment banks or brokerage firms that do the same thing that I do, and they can accumulate various opinions from the various what we are called as sell side analysts, as opposed to a buy side analyst, which would be my opposing analyst at one of these funds, and they do the same thing that we do, perhaps maybe sometimes with not as much detail, so they can accumulate 20 or 30 opinions from Wall Street as to what their estimates or their target prices or their ratings are, and make their decisions based on the accumulated information that they have.
But your clients are institutional clients, not, you don't have a subscription service. Okay. Good.
It's not a subscription service, and as opposed to retail, which would be mom and pop, grandma, whatever, that would be called retail.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Sure. All right. Well, let's see if all right. So I do not have access to share the slides. I know the commissioners, you should have the slides, and I'm sure they'll get posted, but I don't have screen sharing at the moment. So what I was going to say is there is a slide that talks about our firm just a little bit. We are the largest minority and woman-owned investment bank and brokerage firm on Wall Street. There are a number of them, but we're the biggest. We were put together by the combination of Williams Capital and Siebert to create Siebert Williams Shank and Company. We're very substantial, particularly on the fixed income side. We're very high, if not number one, in a number of different categories. Particularly strong in municipal bonds. While I'm not a bond expert, the firm is a bond expert. There is another page. I wasn't planning on going through these. I thought we'd have them up on the screen, but there's a page.
You should have.
Okay. Well, there we are. Okay, so I'm now moving past to that's where, there we go. The coverage universe. This give you a little bit of a sense. We specialize in SMID and mid cap utility names for the most part. It's not universal. We have some small and we have some large, but the types of companies that NorthWestern is, MDU, you're familiar with, obviously, Avista, other companies in your region. So this is what we currently cover today. This is what we do in detail, as well as doing a lot of work on the industry and put out reports on these companies. I think next on the following page, this is very, very interesting. I don't know if you guys get to see this type of thing very often, but what this chart represents is the relative yield spread of utility stocks versus treasury bonds. And in this case, it's the 30-year treasury bond. What it's showing here is that the relative yield spread is very, very high. By historical standards, going over that blue line on the top is very rare. So utility stocks are out of favor. Compare that to, say, 2019, when they were very much in favor before the COVID-19 pandemic. Things have switched from, potentially being overvalued or certainly nearer fair value to being very, very much out of favor. And in fact, we hit a yield spread that has only occurred one time before, during the big sell down during the COVID-19 pandemic in March. That it only happened, when we had quite a number of things going on back in the mid 70s that were roiling the markets back then. So I thought we'd start talking about utility investors a little bit, and please do inject if you want to talk about any of these things. But utility investors a little bit different than what you see in the general market. They're not swinging for the fences for things like Tesla. We're not looking for making 100 times our money or even doubling our money necessarily on a given year. These are investors that are looking for income, dividend yield, and a lot of fixed income. And as the baby boomers have aged, this is very much a sector of interest to retirees who are looking for income. You can think about who the investors are a little bit in the sense of it's a bit of a bond proxy, but not quite. What I put here was there are some similarities to what's called the Treasury inflation protected bonds or TIPS. Those are bonds that carry a yield, but are also incremented as inflation moves. And that's somewhat of what a retiree is looking for, or an income fund, or anyone that's looking for income. They'd like to have some protection against inflation, and they'd like to have a little bit of growth. And that's where growth comes in for the utility stocks. Having growth helps to protect that current yield that you purchase. You know, say today, the average yield is about 3.5% for electric utilities, for instance. You'd like to have some confidence that you're going to make that 3.5% yield that provides that income for your retirement for the remainder of your life. Well, one of the ways that you do that is having some growth in the stock from earnings and just general fundamental growth. As that class is looking for that confidence in maintaining that yield, that income stream, stability and predictability of utility stocks is what they're looking for. So they want to know if I buy a stock, if I buy MDU, am I going to get that 3% yield for the next 10 or 20 years in my retirement? Or, there are specific funds that invest to be able to pay a certain level of yield. And they want to know that they're going to be able to deliver that or to receive that. So that's a lot of what we do, is trying to determine, is this company going to provide that predictability and stability? At the end of the day, whether we're thinking about revenues or earnings, it really is all about translating into that dividend. Because another thing about the utility stocks is they do move somewhat in relation to interest rates, and that's because they are not so much, you'll read stories in the press a lot about how they're interest rate sensitive and interest expense is going to affect earnings and things of that sort. And that's not untrue, but really it's more this relative dividend yield value that it provides. So at the end of the day, what we're caring about is where dividends are, where they're going to go, where that growth is. We're also interested in the growth in the particular company for that, I'll call it inflation hedge plus valuation. The capital appreciation in the stock is another way that you can earn a return. So as far as the commissioners go, what you should be aware of or know about is what takes place in the company's dockets is of crucial importance to this investor class, and they want to continuously evaluate what's taking place so that they can have this level of comfort in the stability and predictability of their returns. And that leads us to the next page. Maybe you're somewhat curious sometimes why you hear from investors or who's listening on the other side of a particular proceedings. They're listening like I'm listening, and other people are listening to glean, what the situation is with a particular company, whether it be Avista or NorthWestern or MDU or whoever. So we're always evaluating, is that stability, is that predictability in place? So one of the things that I wanted to mention, and I'm not sure if you're necessarily aware of, but we listen to lots of different commissions and see what the tenor of the commissions are, We don't expect commissions to approve everything. We don't expect commissioners to always agree on every topic, but we're also looking for what is the tenor, what is the attitude, what is the attitude is I guess as good a word as any. I'll give you an example here. Recently, I was listening to a particular commission, and there was one commissioner who seems to be just a no on everything. Doesn't appear to be an open mind, doesn't like anything. And in the process of saying no is a fair answer for an investor, but constantly berating the corporation as part of the answers as they were discussing things. So, be aware. This has also happened at the Montana Commission. I've many years have listened to various proceedings, and sometimes there have been heated moments or times where there was some hostility. We're looking for that to see, what the various positions of commissioners are, but also the general environment at a particular commission. One thing I wanted to mention here, ROEs have clearly been falling with interest rates. That is sensible, and I actually did some back of the envelope calculations today to see where it appeared to me that the required rate of return on equity in utilities are. It's somewhere in the 9.5% range. I think for most stocks, there are some very, very cheap stocks that would suggest that their returns are over 10%, even a little bit higher than that. And I just wanted to point this one issue out. These are companies that have to compete with the general stock market. So the general stock market has returned 10% on average for, I think it's over 110 years at this point. So they have to compete with Tesla to a certain degree. They have to compete with other corporations that have higher returns. And as we see ROEs ticking down towards the high 8s and low 9s, I think that puts them somewhat at a competitive disadvantage to the rest of the equity market. One of the other issues is, the regulatory compact is an understood concept. Utility investors forego higher returns for a fixed return with the understanding that there will be some of this stability and predictability. And, we do have regulatory lag that is a function of historical test years and, rate case filings and how long do rate cases take to adjudicate, things of that sort. But from my perspective, and I'm sure yours is probably a little bit different, utility investors are frequently behind, and you never do get that recovery of under earning in prior periods. Sometimes I do see commissions get very, I'll call it upset or antagonized if a company over earns, but there's not much recognition that frequently, if not the majority of the time, companies under earn their allowed returns, and there's no mechanism to go back and recover that for a particular year that you.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't see. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. You're covering a lot of ground, and I do think that we should ask a whole bunch of questions, because I'll simply forget if I let you go farther and farther. So here's what I'm seeing. When we can see a power company have record profits, the ratepayers are going to be screaming at me. Mm-hmm. Why are you approving any more rate increases if they're experiencing record profits? Okay. Now, what I'm trying to learn is, during the time the power companies asking investors to invest, they're wearing $5,000 suits saying we have this incredible future. And then 2 days later, they're in the Public Service Commission with a hole in their shirt saying they're going broke and we need a rate increase. Okay. And this is a tough thing to balance, right? But you just mentioned, people get pretty concerned when there's record profits. Well, that's why, right? We're not supposed to be letting anybody have record profits. We're supposed to be saying they need a reasonable rate of return. That's not record profits, right?
Well, I would say record profits do not necessarily mean that you're earning your return either. I would say, what is that return the equivalent of? Does that mean if you're having record profits, is that because you're over earning, or is that because your rate base and revenues have grown?
Well, here's where it gets a little more confusing with us. So this happened just before Commissioner Fielder and Brown were on board. We had a hearing for NorthWestern Energy, and there was a newspaper article, Pinocchi better be watching things because NorthWestern Energy is experiencing record profits. So I brought that up in the hearing with the article, and one of our staffers, Gary Duncan, said, hey, it's not true. They're not experiencing record profits. Well, then I get a phone call that they're experiencing record profits in a neighboring state, and it's spilling over to where Montana then is concerned. What do I do in the case where they say, well, they're having record profits because NorthWestern Energy is in many states, right? I got to get better at answering that question. And so before I forget, I just wanted to, let's cover that maybe afterwards, but don't let me forget that. Thank you.
Sure. Well, that is obviously you have political issues and constituents that you have to answer to. But I think it would be fair, part of the problem may just be that customers are not aware of what the regulatory compact is. And record earnings for a corporation does not necessarily mean you have record earnings in a regulatory jurisdiction. And you probably have to explain to those people that don't understand that in order for them to understand what it is that a company might be coming to the commission and saying, in your jurisdiction, I'm under earning. And there are other corporations that have non-regulated subsidiaries where it might appear that the utility is earning record profits where they may not on the utility side, but they may be earning record earnings from non-regulated sources. And that, that's a difficult thing, but you're going to have to explain that to them. I also don't think, as we were discussing here, regulatory lag, I think they don't understand that either. So sometimes, I don't know how you make that educational outreach, but I'm going to get into that a little bit more on a different topic. And I think that needs to take place more. Next bullet, the time it takes. I've seen, some commissions slow play dockets for delaying rate increases or just to take extra time to have the opportunity to be on the soapbox. We just like to see rate cases done in an expeditious, at least meet the statutory hurdles. When a docket takes twice as long as the statutory timeline, that's a problem. So like I was mentioning before, the tone, I think I'm never insulted personally when a commissioner or a commission order says no to something per se. We do take notice of, has the commission said no 5 or 6 times in a row? Has there been multiple disallowances, particularly things like, I have some companies that are in 3 states, or multiple owners of power plants, and we get different answers, different outcomes for the same issue. Those kinds of things where there are discrepancies, those cause investors to lose confidence in those companies. And at the end of the day, what this is all about is can investors gain that confidence so that they feel like they're getting a fair return via the company, which is seeking a fair return? And if they don't believe that the commissions are being fair or overly punitive or not really taking equity investors' concerns into effect, this will cause the companies to make it be more difficult to invest their capital needs and make it more expensive to do so. So in an ideal world, the perception from investors would be, I have a very fair commission. I'm very confident that the company will be able to recover its costs and investments. My predictability and stability of my dividend is very good. I will give money to that company when they offer stock at a very low rate. And that's what everybody involved, that's what ratepayers want, that's what the company wants, that's what the commissioners want. I think that's the ideal situation that everybody wants to achieve. Right now, we have a lot of energy policy issues. Many of the commissions, it is not entirely clear, and particularly we will get some diametrically opposed commission orders that don't seem to jive with what we think the energy policy will be. Those are things that confuse investors. I have a slide coming up about the clean energy transition. I think that's I don't think there's a bigger topic today really to talk about, but I'm not seeing a lot of recognition from commissions about the importance of the clean energy transition, the magnitude of the issues involved. And as we'll talk about, the costs and things like that are things that need to be addressed. And as you were saying, Commissioner, there needs to be some serious education with customers because this is going to be very, very expensive. Our energy policy is transforming very rapidly, and I'm not sure that they're aware of that. So that's going to become an issue about costs. So I wanted to just highlight a couple of comparisons, I guess. There are states that I think you would find investors would evaluate as good regulatory environments and others that they would not view as good regulatory environments. And I don't know how you've been following the Arizona situation in recent cases, but they have been demonstrating, I'm going to call it some utility hostility while seeming to show some rate fatigue. And that has involved some discussion about aggravation with rate-based growth and has created quite a disruption in the utility space overall, not just for the couple of companies involved, but some sense of rate fatigue overall amongst commissioners. And I know you guys all talk to each other, but that situation is exacerbated not just by the outcome, it's exacerbated by how the docket was adjudicated. And there was a lot of extreme hyperbole, if not insults. And I think the lesson to be learned from that is negative outcomes are to be expected. No's are to be expected. Even disallowances are to be expected. What really hurts investor psychology is the way that it's done. And insults are not required as part of the process. And particularly when things get rather extreme, investors remember these things for years, and this causes the cost of both debt and equity to rise for those companies in those jurisdictions. And I think commissioners are not always aware that while they may be communicating to their constituents on one level, they are also communicating to the rest of the world, the investor world. And while the constituents may be happy when the answer is a no, there's a way to say no, just reject it, without causing the disruption on the investor side. And I think that is also sort of a win-win across the board for everyone. May not be a win for the company on what is not approved, but you will have cheaper cost for consumers in the long run how you say things. So I think the perception of how things are done is very important. The next slide, I guess, is kind of somewhat redundant. What we're looking for it is good regulatory jurisdictions that give them the confidence that investors are looking for. Some of the things that we look for, in addition to the things I mentioned, speed of rate cases, things that help to mitigate regulatory lag. So regulatory lag is the evil for an investor. Trackers, even earnings tests. One of the things that I'm somewhat surprised about sometimes is if a company's under earning and yet a company goes in for, say, a fuel clause or something like that, and something is rejected in a fuel clause proceeding or something, taxes, something along those lines. But I see a hostile commission saying, well, you can't do this, you can't do that. Well, if a company's under earning, the necessity for the hostility, this is not something that's causing the company to over earn. I think those kinds of things ought to be avoided. But forward test years and attrition mechanisms like California has, earnings tests or trackers, riders, whatever, those are very valuable and give confidence to investors. And I think at the end of the day, that's what you're looking for, is the cheapest possible cost of capital. I think the next slide is the most important topic, maybe not directly for you, but this is something I've been studying quite a bit. I've talked to various companies about this, including NorthWestern and MDU, and I think we're caught in a place where we're not very well prepared for this clean energy transition. We are going full speed ahead on things like wind and solar. We have not greatly considered the unintended consequences, and for some companies, particularly ones in your neck of the woods, the Dakotas, Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, parts of the Midwest, that are fairly fossil fuel friendly. I think there's a little bit behind the curve to a certain extent, because, as part of the regulatory construct, right, we're always considering usefulness versus cost, right? So it seems that we're accelerating the momentum towards a rather monumental change, a sea change in how the electric grid works, particularly in the generation resources. And while some states are maybe somewhat a little bit more resistant to renewables, and are a little bit more leaning towards fossil fuels, I think the writing's on the wall. We may see federal legislation, states that have been resistant. I'm thinking particularly South and Midwestern states started more resistant and have gone to a more aggressive stance, maybe not Oregon or Washington level aggression or California. But I think the writing's on the wall. We are seeing a pretty rapid transition to pretty much all renewables, and how that transition takes place, we don't know 100% at this point, but I think we have to come to grips with the fact it is going to happen. The president has set forth a number of goals. 2035 and 2050 are the basic landmarks for where we need to achieve certain carbon standards. And to achieve those, certainly on the electric side, is going to require those renewables. The investment involved here, globally, the estimates are up to $100 trillion. And for the US, this is going to be trillions of dollars. For individual companies, this is going to be hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. So as we are trying to prepare for this, it doesn't seem like in many states, I'll even say many companies, that there is any serious crisis mode. But considering 2035 is only 14 years away, almost 13, a little bit more speed might be in order. So this is where you guys come in. The cost versus policy question, which has always been the case, is now leaning more towards the policy leading the cost. And you guys are going to have to somehow deal with your constituents in the reality that the costs are going to be rising fairly rapidly. And this comes back to the question of, if rate base is rising rapidly, you will have record profits in the industry. And how do you explain that to your constituents? So I think that conversation is something that you need to do, the companies need to do, and that reality needs to start to be discussed. So the intermittency of renewables is really causing me quite a bit of concern. And as of course you're aware, NorthWestern has been talking about their capacity needs for years. I've been concerned about that. They probably are the company with the most open position of any utility in the country. For a while, that has actually been not that onerous of a problem. But what we see today is as intermittency becomes a bigger part of the electric grid, we're seeing the evidence in places. California, they have rolling blackouts seemingly pretty regularly. Natural events, wildfires, storms are causing disruptions. Particularly the thing that's caught my eye most recently, of course, we had this storm in Texas in February, but right now in the UK and the EU, those countries and regions are much further advanced than us in terms of integrating the renewables, but they have failed to deal with the capacity issue. And at the moment, the real way to deal with that is lithium ion battery storage. That may not be the world's greatest be all end all technology for permanent utilization, but it's what we have today. And so particularly in the UK as a good example, that country has been shutting down its coal plants, its nuclear plants, and replacing that with wind energy. And that wind energy is up to as much as 40% of their electricity production. In the last few months, it's down to about 10%. And that has caused huge spikes in natural gas and power prices. I think power was 2,000 pounds a megawatt just the other day. We're seemingly on a path.
Question.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, Commissioner.
All right. So look, when we go to wind energy and we're going to leave our base load power, we're going to find ourselves in situations where when the wind stops, we have to scramble to find energy. Okay?
Yes.
Now, in my math equation, that means your rates are going to go up. Now, when I talk to the ratepayer, they really don't give a crap about wind energy as much as they do keeping their energy bill low, okay? So if I'm going to sell that we're going to go to more wind energy or solar, I'm really going to have to prepare them that the price is going to go up, which is what we're talking about here today.
Exactly.
Billions of dollars are going to have to be spent, and your power bill is going to go up. And if I could stay with nuclear, if I could stay with coal, your power prices are going to be cheaper. Now, I'm going to explain it that way. And I'm going to say you got to vote for a better president than Biden, who's more open to cheaper energy. Now, am I wrong to explain it that way? What's your opinion there?
Well, renewable energy obviously comes at no cost except for the capital. So in the short run, we will have an increase in cost. Part of that will be offset by the fact that you're no longer using fuel. So
wait. You're right. I hear that point made all the time. And let me tell you how they sell it to me. When we put up a wind turbine, Pinochi, the wind is free. Now, when you buy coal, you have to pay someone for the coal. Then we got to pay to ship the coal. And then after we burn the coal, we got to deal with the ash. But let's talk about this argument. I got wind turbines that are blowing up, blades are falling off, and we're burying them in Wyoming before they're even paid for. So then I got to bring in another set. And that the bottom line is I got a turbine, which I'm trying to get the other commissioners to come see in Great Falls. It was installed in the 1800s, and it's still working today, okay? I'm not going to have a wind turbine that's built today that's going to be lasting 100 years, but I certainly have them in hydroelectric dams. And the argument can be made that sucker should have been replaced 30, 40 years ago. But the bottom line is turbines in coal plants, turbines in hydroelectric dams, turbines in nuclear power plants last far longer than the turbines that wind is doing. A solar panel starts turning yellow after a few years, gets covered with bird poop, and it isn't producing the same power it did 10 years down the road. Now, my ratepayers are getting smarter, and they're knowing this, okay? So even though you can say we're not, buying coal, shipping coal, the hydroelectric projects, that water's free. We're not buying that water. My nuclear power plants now can have fuel rods in them that'll last 50 years, okay? I've got to explain that to them, that wind and solar is darn expensive, even though wind is free, because the turbines aren't lasting. And some of these units are coming down before they're paid for. Is that argument being brought up at all?
Well, there is no perfect answer to the renewable clean energy transition cost question. And I forgot to mention this. Yes.
When wind and solar isn't working, it's nighttime or I have no wind, we then have to turn to a baseload power that's on all the time. That is going to be coal, that's going to be hydroelectric, that's going to be nuclear. Look, if I take out all the nuclear power plants, all coal and all hydro, and let's not hide the fact we're tearing down hydroelectric dams in Oregon right now, then what? Is my electricity going to turn on and off all day? Well, then the answer is batteries. Look, battery storage to last Montana through a few days would have to be a facility so large, it would look like a small city of batteries. You could see it from space. That's not feasible. I can't tell people we're going to build a city bigger than Billings, Montana, and it's going to have is batteries in it. I can't do that.
Well, for starters, one of the points I'm trying to make here is we need to come to grips with, I didn't start out as a wind, solar, battery proponent. There's no doubt about that. There are characteristics of coal and gas and nuclear that are very, very attractive. For starters, you don't have to have batteries. But the realization is that this is happening. This is going to happen. So I think we need to begin to evaluate how do we make this happen at the cheapest possible way, because it may be mandated. But you can integrate, and I think that's why they call it a clean energy transition. We need to begin to transition to more of the renewable resources. We can't do it all at once, obviously, particularly in a state like yours, which has been accustomed to very, very inexpensive electricity. However, the disruptions all around you is going to mean that you need to begin to assess all of these issues and incorporate some of the answers and be prepared for the day if it does come where it's completely mandated. And you will gain experience in those technologies. And yes, occasionally wind turbines fail. Occasionally everything fails. Coal plants have failed. It's not that common. So it's a pretty rarity that the wind turbines fail. It's a pretty uncommon situation where the batteries fail in storage. And they have dealt with that through various technologies so that it is not a complete facility failure. It could be just a battery rack. And at the end of the day, none of these answers are going to be necessarily where we end up 30 years from now. Certainly, lithium ion batteries will be changed for different battery technologies where they won't have to be quite so large. And you're really looking for advancements in technology that will get you to that end game. But you have to sort of begin to get on the path and realize that all around you, Washington, Oregon, California, Idaho, people will be shutting off their coal plants. And as you mentioned, some hydro. Hydro is one of the greatest renewable resources that there is. I mean, it was very advantageous at the end of the day that you have.
It's clean energy. There's no exhaust. There's no nuclear is clean energy. I don't have any exhaust coming out of a nuclear power plant.
Emissions free is what that is where the world is headed, is emissions free.
Then why aren't we building a new nuclear plant?
Well, at the moment, they're very difficult. They're very expensive. And there's only one being built in Georgia, and that's been problematic. There was another one that was being built in South Carolina that caused the failure of that company. The new technology is not ready. It's not even licensed yet. So unfortunately, those are not. Tell
the U.S. Navy that, who has a nuclear reactor in the aircraft carrier that'll last longer than the aircraft carrier, which is scheduled to last over 50 years. How come they're running? The newest submarine, the Montana, being built right now. The reactor and the rods will last the entire life of the boat, which will exceed 50 years. That's not untested. That's done.
Well, the scale of even an aircraft carrier is not the scale of, I believe, what the next units will be. You're looking at, 100, 200 megawatt units or even smaller. Those are coming. And the Navy has a different standard than what you will see from the
No, you're right. We can't have those high potency fuel rods in our facilities that are not military. So I'm proposing that we simply put that nuclear reactor at Mount Stem Air Force Base. If they guard our nuclear weapons, put their nuclear reactor on the base. Then we can have the high intensity fuel rods that are basically weapon grade plutonium. If I have the generating power station at Mount Stem Air Force Base, who cares? Put it next to the building where I have all my nuclear weapons. Why can't I do that?
And you probably would be surprised at what the reactor for that aircraft carrier costs as a proportion of that aircraft carrier. So getting cheaper commercial nuclear units is going to come. But it's not ready yet. That's not the solution for today. And that never has really been a big solution for Montana to begin with. So
Chris, I have a question for you. This is Commissioner Fielder. This dialogue with Commissioner Pinocci, it leads me to come back to your initial statement that kind of opened this up. And that was, we're going to alternative energy. That's just a fact. But how much do you factor in the political ideology that's driving that's behind that's subject to shift dramatically, in presidential election years or in, congressional cycles even? Do you factor that in, or do you assume, are your assumptions based on that the direction that we're headed right now under the current administration is a permanent direction that won't be reversed?
It is, to a certain degree, the demands of the rest of the world. So to the extent that we don't want to have problems with the European Union and the UK and Australia, and large proportions of the world is demanding this of us. It's demanding it of China. It's demanding it of Russia. It's a bit of a foregone conclusion that the world is not going to let us not proceed this direction. So I don't see it as much of a Republican Democrat issue as it's a world is going to force this issue, and time is getting somewhat short for us to make this transition. And I don't see, I think Commissioner Pinocchi's quite right. There are cost concerns, but we have decided to go down a policy path, partly by our own choosing, partly due to international pressures. Companies, it's not just politics. It's Google and Apple and Amazon are demanding that we go down this route as well. So your customers for the utilities are demanding these same, let's call them services. We want clean energy. It is coming from all directions. And yes, maybe if Trump was president today, we'd be going a little slower. But that pressure from all of these sources was still coming down on President Trump the same way that it was President Biden. President Biden is a little more sensitive to the issue, let's say. So I think it's coming, whether we like it or not. And you as commissioners have a dilemma. We're setting a policy which is setting up for very, very significant investment requirements to achieve, and education of consumers, and I think even to a certain extent encouraging the companies to be proactive in this big cycle is important. So I think all of the various policy makers, including commissioners and companies and state legislatures and customers, need to get together and come to understand what this all means. And what we don't want is we don't want to get to the other side like the UK and the EU has and see us have 2,000 pound, which is over $3,000 a megawatt hour power, because we said, okay, put up some wind, put up some solar, and have not filled in that capacity gap, which is one of the things Commissioner Pinocchi was saying. Capacity is very, very, very valuable. And so, yes, the short answer is I think it's inevitable, and it's coming quicker than people realize, and we haven't come to grips with that.
Chris, this is Commissioner O'Donnell. In terms of your estimation of companies, how do you quantify the what seems to me to be a lack of baseload power that would be available in a time of a crisis when the utility has to go to the marketplace, such as you're familiar with Montana? It gets a little cold here, and polar vortex things. And I have surmised that if the same polar vortex was affecting Idaho and Washington or something simultaneously in California, if Montana goes to the marketplace for an ever shrinking amount of baseload power that is available on demand, we're going to get outbid. How do you quantify, in terms of your ratings, the regional availability of power and the ability of that utility to meet the power needs of its territory?
Commissioner O'Donnell, I think you've summarized in essence what I was really getting at. Is you do have Western imbalance market. It is all connected, right? And we're seeing issues in California. We will probably see greater issues in other states surrounding you. You're going to see, I think, virtually the extinction of coal in the Western market before too long, and nationwide as a country, we'll see some of this great base load. I think what we need to get grips on, and from what I'm hearing is, I think you and Commissioner Pinocchi are thinking about base load and how important it is. We are transitioning for better or for worse, and I would say temporarily for worse, is we're transitioning from a baseload country to one that has very little baseload. And hydro, pump storage, some nuclear. We even have considerably less. We have over 20% less nuclear than we used to. We are going to have less and less baseload. And that's just the simple fact. Baseload generally means fossil fuels. Nuclear, we're in this transition period where it's very difficult to build. It's extraordinarily costly. The one in Georgia is more than double the original estimate. It's causing a great deal of strain there. Until we do get these smaller units, and that's they will come, but I would guess not by 2035 we'll see these units installed, or certainly not in any great quantity. What we have to use.
Excuse me. Yeah. I don't know if you're. For instance, if in this region, Northwest Energy, as you know, has a significant capacity deficit. So as the market for available market power shrinks, does that affect your rating for Northwestern?
Well, let me tell you. I will be watching very, very closely what the commission does. The company, so you know the background. There was a philosophical bent that it was best to just ride the market. And one of the things that concerns me about Northwestern is this capacity shortage that they have. They do have to go buy in the market a lot of power. And as your neighbors, big power users, move further and further away from the traditional baseload model to the more intermittent model, which they have yet to fill in the capacity gap. We're adding the energy, wind and solar. We're not filling in the capacity gap. That, for the time being, that's the batteries. We will see some other technologies evolve, and we will see better batteries, but we are not filling in that void very rapidly, which is what the UK and the EU is regretting now today. And what happened there was, as you can imagine, regulators said, well, okay, build the wind, but we don't want to build the batteries because we're already spending money. We're looking at the cost benefit, right? And their choice was to not spend the money, and they're paying the price today. They've had dozens of their energy marketers fail there. In addition to customers are now paying this £2,000 for energy. So what scares me in Montana, because Northwestern has this big capacity gap, what are they going to fill in their capacity gap with? And I do understand that they want to build some new generation, and I'm going to be watching your commission to see how you respond to that, because I'm scared to death that they're very short in a market that's getting worse. And so where it might have been okay to be short this much power even 5 years ago, I think it's less and less, or it's riskier and riskier as every day goes by. Just looking at these other areas, Texas, California, and Europe have had events that have proven that we need more capacity, and Northwestern in particular needs a lot of capacity.
One other question, please, along this line. Do you think that the surge of utilities that went to natural gas over the past few years, saying that it is so cheap that we see market forces pushing the prices up on there, do you think that they made a bad bet?
Well, natural gas is an important element of the energy transition, right? We've been going through this transition for a while. It was the best choice for capacity. As this momentum grows for zero emissions, natural gas is not going to be the natural choice. Were those the correct choices to make at the time? And even today, some natural gas is necessary. And, a lot of companies are working to try to do renewable natural gas and hydrogen. Those are not ready in great quantities today, but we may be able to transition the fuel source a little bit. I don't think natural gas is a bad choice, but it is one that is going to have limited utility, certainly 15 or 20 years from now. So it's part of, I think, the tools that we have today as part of the transition, but we have to recognize that probably 20 years from now, natural gas is going to be a more difficult fuel to utilize.
Okay, I got a question.
Yes, Commissioner.
Natural gas, it has an exhaust. Yes. You're venting hydrocarbons. Okay, it's not clean energy at all. How could we be talking about natural gas when nuclear has no exhaust at all? If we put in another hydroelectric facility, we build another dam, I don't have any hydrocarbons. How could natural gas even be considered when it has exhaust and hydrocarbon? The only thing natural gas offers is this: less hydrocarbon than coal. And if we put a clean capture unit on coal, I have no exhaust at all. So why isn't it a question for me to put carbon capture on? Why are we building units with carbon capture? Why are they up and running at all? Do you mean to tell me we're going to close a coal plant that has a carbon capture unit on that has no hydrocarbon release?
Well, we've tried.
Is that what's happening?
We've tried a number of carbon capture plants. There's actually a carbon capture company. That technology is also somewhat limited, and the one carbon capture plant, well, there's actually a couple of them, have not been particularly successful or cheap. So we're kind of stuck in this place where we have some restrictions on what technologies we can utilize, and we have some restrictions on what our technology can achieve. So I do believe that in the long run, we are in a zero emissions, or at least a carbon neutral situation, and that will make natural gas and coal very, very difficult in time. For the time being, yes, anything that we can do to replace coal with natural gas, which has about half of the emissions, is a step in the right direction that helps us achieve our goals. But I do think ultimately, politically, we will head to a zero emissions type of regime.
All right, back to my question. Why don't I build another hydroelectric dam?
Well, hydro is very difficult. As you pointed out, we're taking some down. They're very difficult to get. We only have some limited geographies where that will work. Same thing with pump storage. They have to be in the right place. So if we can build them, if someone comes to you and says, I want to build a pump storage or a new hydroelectric dam, I would certainly be interested to hear that.
Okay, I've got two dams that have no turbines on them now. Gibson Reservoir, 50 miles from my house. It was designed to have one. They didn't install it. I'm trying to get it installed. Should I move forward with that?
I don't know anything about that particular dam technically, but if you have the capacity to add hydroelectric of any kind in a cost-efficient manner, it sounds like not a terrible idea.
Well, I'm moving forward with it. All right, the best.
But I don't know what the scale of that dam is. It doesn't sound like that's probably going to solve Montana's long-term energy requirements either.
No, but if I have a dam that's already built that we can put a turbine on, for Christ's sakes, let's get that done. I have two dams currently that I can do that, and I have locations for 5 dams to be built. 5
new dams?
5 new dams. We have tons of property in Montana. Very few people. I have great rivers. I have 5 locations we could build hydroelectric facilities, large ones.
I would be somewhat skeptical that that's achievable today.
Why? Because someone's against dams?
A lot of people are against hydroelectric.
No, I understand that, but I don't know why. What the fish can't naturally go upstream? Wind turbines are killing birds every day.
And bats.
Why are we turning a blind eye to that? My hydroelectric dam is responsible for bird production, nesting, places for ducks to land while my wind turbines are killing them. How is it we can ignore that simply because somebody says, well, we just don't want to talk about that?
We need
I
to
don't
pursue
understand.
as much hydro, whether it be man-made or dams, reservoirs, run a river, or pump storage as we can. The problems with those is permitting and licensing, and just getting, if you follow IDACorp at all, Idaho Power has been working on relicensing existing dams for decades. The process in Washington is horrible. So if you said I would like 5 new dams in these locations, I would say by the time you could get those licensed in Washington, this transition will be half over. So I'm skeptical from that perspective. I'm not skeptical that you're right that we should pursue other hydro, just from a practical matter. So I think that the message I'm trying to send here is this thing is happening and we need to address a lot of things. And you guys are part of the policy committee, so to speak, of the United States. And we need to address the costs, the speed at which this transition is taking place, how to do it, what technologies to do. And I don't hear a lot of expediency or crisis. I'm going to call it crisis management. It is somewhat of a crisis that needs to be addressed. And I have not heard of these 5 dams, but have you raised new hydroelectric with NorthWestern? I'd be interested to hear that. I've never heard about that story. But if there's anything to take away.
Let me answer that.
Yes, sir.
I've set up the meeting between Greenfield Irrigation and NorthWestern Energy. Greenfield Irrigation currently owns the dam at Gibson Reservoir, and we use it for irrigation. Greenfield Irrigation would love to put on a turbine, and it's right outside of Augusta, and I believe that we can transmit the power through Northwest Energy in Augusta. Also, Augusta is complaining about all kinds of energy problems right now, which I think will be corrected. So I've also turned to the legislature, working with 2 or 3 legislators to get the money to come up with the funds to put the turbine in. And Greenfield has agreed to pay back the legislative session and the taxpayers all the money within 10 years with interest, costing the taxpayers nothing. And I'll ensure a better energy future by having a turbine I don't have that's baseload power on all the time. There is another dam that is ripe to put a turbine in. Northwest Energy happens to own it. So I'm encouraging them to install the damn thing, okay? So we're working on that. Now, the location to build a new hydroelectric dam is outside of Fort Benton, and it will be in the Missouri River, which could be a lake outside of Fort Benton. What people like to do in Montana is build a house on the lake. If we look at Holter Reservoir, there's $1 billion of housing around it since we put it in. You look at Flathead Lake, the typical home around Flathead Lake starts at $500,000 and can be up to $5 million. Everybody wants to live on the lake. Why don't we just make more of them? And then we can generate electricity at the same time. The fundamentals on real estate, on having a place to go water skiing, a place to go ice fishing or snowmobiling, or all the recreation that comes with lakes is $1 billion industry in Montana. For me to put another lake in Montana is a positive thing. People really don't like looking at fields of wind turbines, but they certainly would like to look at another lake. I mean, we could take a poll. I'm pretty sure I'm right. I don't think anyone in this meeting would argue with me. Now, I get it. The problem is I have environmentalists that don't like dams. But the bottom line is there was a president who said we needed to build them all over the country, and it was one of the best things we ever did. And the turbines are more efficient and last longer than wind turbines, and they just do a better job than solar. Now, I know that I may be fighting an industry that is backed by a bunch of greenies. But you mark my words, as soon as the majority of this country is going to wind up paying double or triple for the energy bill, you're going to see some changes in who we elect in office. I promise you.
Well, I can't verify the doubling or tripling of electric bill. We will see some increase in costs and some decrease in costs. On an overall basis, I would venture to guess we'll see some increase.
How can you say we're going to see a decrease in cost? That's impossible.
But you'll see the fuel costs go away. That will partly fund what we'll see in the other technology deployments. I'm not going to suggest that we won't see rising costs. We also need transmission and distribution investments to achieve a lot of this energy transition. So
well, I'm preaching the high efficiency power line all over the country.
They're also difficult. Part of all this is we need to get, like I was saying, the policymakers need to get together, and this is something that the United States is not very good at, and agree on what we're going to do, because we do need to make it easier to get transmission lines done. Hydroelectric plants, to a certain extent, would be nice, to speed along these new nuclear units that Bill Gates is working on, amongst other people. Those things are not moving very quickly. So what we are left with is the options that we currently have. And we need to come to grips with that is what we're doing. And policy is leading, and costs are not so much the objective of what the policy is at the moment. It is carbon reduction. And that's kind of my message. And in addition to, I am afraid of the capacity gap in Montana. So I think these are very, very big issues. And I don't see at the commissions in general a great recognition for our big problems and the speed at which this is coming. And I'd like to hear more. I very much would like to hear how the commission responds to what NorthWestern's proposals for their energy transition will be. That will be a part of the determining factor of what I think about that stock as an investment.
Okay, so I got a company that's interested in making hydrogen.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to modify the coal-fired facility in, we're now generating with coal. We could then turn these turbines with hydrogen. Now, the reason we want to put the hydrogen at the coal plant is because the transmission lines to Washington are already in place.
Right.
Now, those are 500 kW lines, and we can increase them to 1,000, okay, without modifying the structures with the new high efficiency cables, okay? So I can double the capacity to Washington and turn the turbines with hydrogen, all right? I got a company that says they're ready to go, and Colstrip would have this bright future and the turbines turning with hydrogen. Why aren't we doing that?
Well, I think hydrogen itself has a lot of issues. It's a very complicated question. First, you have to produce hydrogen in a cost-effective manner.
Okay, wait, stop. Let's answer that question. You're very true. Hydrogen's expensive. Now,
yes,
these commissioners understand this. When I have too much electricity, and I do when the wind's blowing, I can't even give it away. Okay, that's the problem. I have too much electricity all the time, and it is worthless when I have too much, and the price is cheap. That's when I make hydrogen.
This is
I
one
make
of the
hydrogen when I have all the electricity in the world and I have no place to put it. Then we make the hydrogen and we store it. And then when the wind stops blowing, I just start burning the hydrogen that cost me nothing because I made it when I didn't have any place to take my surplus electricity.
So
that's better than battery storage by a long shot.
Well, that definitely has a storage story. So the question is, how much are the transmission lines? How much would the hydrogen storage facility be? How much would the conversion?
It's cheaper than batteries. And
Well, I would like to see the economic forecast of that. That would be a
so
great.
we had the guys from Salt Lake come see us. Here's what they told me.
I'm gonna weigh in at this point. Commissioner Pinocci, we have 11 more minutes in this presentation. I'd like to give
All right.
Mr. Ellinghaus the
I'll let you go.
opportunity to finish out his presentation. If you have questions afterward, Commissioner Pinocci, I'm sure Mr. Ellinghaus will be willing to speak with you.
I would be happy to speak to anyone anytime that you'd like to have a chat. I really hope that some of the insights that I gave you in terms of how investors are watching very carefully, and hopefully this big clean energy transition issue, maybe some of the insights were helpful to you. If you would like to follow up, I would be more than happy to have conversation with any commissioner or the group again at some point. Are there any other questions? That's really all I wanted to tell you.
So I'd like to drill down on your discussion with Commissioner Pinocci about transmission.
Sure.
One of the things I think we're certainly watching here at the PSC is perhaps a play at the national level to nationalize transmission, if you will, and to remove citing another regulatory jurisdiction over transmission away from states and make that a federal issue. If you want to comment on that.
As we've talked about a number of federal agencies so far today, whether it be the NRC or the FERC or whomever, giving Washington more control over anything, I think, is generally not a great idea. The bureaucracy in Washington leads to very slow movement. I think what they need to do is give more powers and speed up the process of approval of these very, very critical infrastructures, whether it be hydro or transmission or nuclear or whatever. That would help us to achieve better results in this clean energy transition. Giving another federal agency, or FERC for that matter, I doubt FERC is interested in being in charge of the transmission grid. I think, like all things, it's fairly local infrastructure. Who would be the ones to make the decisions on a local basis about a transmission line that crosses Montana? I mean, we don't have that kind of personnel in the government. As we saw with the offshore wind, we did not have the infrastructure for a federal agency, and it caused delays. So creating some transmission czar seems like a terrible idea.
So, Christopher, yes, pivot to another question. I'm a little confused still after an hour and 22 minutes together about your discussion where you're looking at regulatory environment and essentially decision making of commissions, and you pointed to the example you used as where a commission may make 5 adverse decisions, I believe, in a row or something to that effect.
Sure.
I mean, rate making is it's sort of like a balls and strikes game, if you will, right? I mean, you're judging the pitch that's thrown. And so, well, I appreciate this presentation. I'm having a hard time with the takeaways, other than the takeaway that you're giving us of, we need to be planning as a commission for the transition to clean energy. And I understand that, and I agree with that point. But where I'm having trouble is the place where you started, where you're looking at commission decision making, because it's not a yes or no circumstance every time that we're presented a case, if you will. So that's my thought on that. Do you want to drill down on that at all?
I would say that it's not necessarily does the company lose on a request 5 times in a row per se. And it really matters what they are. And, I could certainly read a filing and say whether I think something's going to make it or not. It's if we see things like hostile commentary, unnecessary commentary from the bench of commissioners, if we see a pattern of disapprovals or disallowances or something like that, it starts to weigh on investors to believe that necessarily a company has much chance at a commission. So that is going to degrade the investor's confidence in the stability of that company and their financial results. So it's kind of, you're discerning patterns. And if you see 5 things in a row, my point was that's hurting the confidence of the investor in what the company will be able to produce in terms of earnings and dividends. Will it be stable? For instance, the one company in Arizona, they're going to see, I'm not sure what number it's going to be, to tell you the truth, 20% or more decrease in their earnings next year as opposed to this year from a regulatory decision. Those, we don't want to see those kinds of events, and they create big drops in stocks. So when we're recommending a name, we don't want to see the stock drop 20%. That's a bad outcome. So we're trying to glean from the regulatory decisions if there's a pattern. Are there hostile commissioners? Why are they hostile? Sometimes companies mess up. We understand if a commission's upset because the company messes up, that's not a problem. If we see it as political or maybe personal even, that's a problem, because then you've lost a vote on a commission and you're not going to be able to achieve things. So I think it's, maybe I should say, we're looking for patterns and we're looking for attitude, because that helps to determine whether we think that company is going to be stable.
May I ask a question?
Yes, Commissioner.
In follow up to that comment? Sure. Do you notice a pattern based on whether a commission is appointed versus elected? Do you see a difference in the risk or the, how you assess that commission's productivity or decision making?
I would not say it is universal, but if I had my druthers, appointed commissions seem to go a little smoother than elected commissions as a general rule. That's not a universal. I wouldn't make a universal statement, but that there is some generality to that. Yes.
Okay. And when you see commissioners, like say there's a commission and there's a commissioner that's not showing up, or a couple that aren't showing up or don't appear to be well prepared or on point. I mean, is that something that you factor into?
Absolutely. I noted in this particular recent rate case that I was watching that certain commissioners did not seem to know things that I thought they should know and didn't seem to have their questions prepared. And yet they were very vigorously no, while it was pretty abundantly apparent that they didn't exactly know what they were talking about. Mm-hmm. So we take note of each commissioner. I write notes about this commissioner said this commissioner said that. I pay very close attention to what each and every commissioner says and whether they're influential on the commission.
So thank you. So if you've got a commission with some commissioners that are kind of bumbling around and don't seem to know really the subject matter that you think they should know, or at the level they should know it when they're discussing it, how does that affect the risk rating of the company then? Is it just a minor factor, or is it, can it be pretty significant?
It can be pretty significant, particularly if you're in a rate case or you're in the approval process for an important asset. Having a commissioner or two that don't seem to be well prepared or well educated is not helpful. I think, as you heard from the rating agencies, they have a proportion of their assessment as commissions. We're somewhat similar. I don't have such a strict percentage that I allocate to that, but if I have my choice between picking a company in a state that I don't feel very good about that commission versus one I'm very confident, I'm going to pick the one in what I'm going to call a good commission every time.
A good commission being one that you feel is fully competent.
I will give you another example. I can't remember the math now, but there was discussion about a rate case and something that was being disallowed, I believe, and it wasn't huge math. It was, let's say it was $100 million, and they were trying to figure out what the revenue reduction would be from disallowing this asset. And it was something not very hard. It was like 25% of $100 million. And they used a calculator and a phone and did not come up with $25 million. So they could not do basic math. That did not give me enormous confidence in that commission.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So I can't tell you, it's a very subjective call. I will put a favorable rating or target price on a company if I don't have a lot of confidence in their commission, if a stock is grossly undervalued, because I don't think a commission can fully negate what seems to be a great deal of value. But if it's more on the margin, then yeah, the commission is maybe a deciding point.
Chris, can I ask you one more question here?
Yes, Commissioner O'Donnell.
General question. You've indicated that the momentum was probably be complete to move the whole American energy economy to renewable power. Your opinion, please. It's a far afield from this, but is that sustainable?
Is moving to a no emitting generation pool completely sustainable? Is that your question?
Well, I'm thinking if other countries of the world are building up their baseload power that much, and we are in global competition with other countries, then it would seem to me that anything that would weaken our ability to be energy reliant is going to have implications that would not be good for this country.
Well, I do firmly believe that we will be transitioning to a virtually emissions-free generation market in time. I don't think that we can get there tomorrow or even by 2035 without having certainly some gas plants. I don't think we're going to have much coal left. There's no doubt about that. So what Commissioner Pinocci was suggesting, that nuclear and coal is probably the perfect baseload characteristics, is probably true. We're going to rely on what's remaining in gas for the time being as we make the transition, and hopefully we will see improvements in the technology. And what we will ultimately have is we will have a mix of renewable types of generation with a respectable amount of storage using multiple technologies, and we will recreate what is today effectively baseload using multiple pieces. That's the, I guess, the dream, really.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm just I know that manufacturing equipment, in particular, if they're rigged at such a degree that from what I've been told, a nanosecond interruption of the power flow shuts down all the equipment, and it takes a lot of time to bring it back up again, whatever.
Yes.
And I just cannot see how the intermittency of generation, what they call, emissions free, in any of these things, with current technology, can provide that amount of certainty that America needs. And certainly, the efforts of the Trump administration were to bring these manufacturing jobs back to America. But if we can't provide the basic needs, then why would they come back? So, I appreciate it's running afield of what I really appreciate your observations and would I'd like to sit down and talk with you for hours. You have an amazing background in all of this, and I just for myself, I appreciate your spending time with us immensely. Thank you.
Sure, I appreciate that, Commissioner O'Donnell. You've hit on part of our problem. Is we have to solve those kinds of problems with the tool set that we have and the cost benefit analysis that we have to do, and it's a very complicated, complex set of questions, and we have we're setting goals, but we have not set how we achieve those goals, and we certainly haven't set those goals to achieve cost neutrality. So as commissioners, you're part of the set of solution makers. How do we achieve all these things? And it's not a very enviable task that you have, but I think we need to set about trying to solve things, and we're not just yet.
Well, and one last thing on that is that I think all of this is achievable if we do have an energy czar whose name happens to be Harry Potter. I don't see any other way other than alchemy, just magic to make these things appear. Legislators seem to think that by just mandating outcomes that defies the laws of supply and demand and economics. And I just see us stumbling down a road that is ultimately very, very dark.
That is a very good word for what's taken place in some of these markets. Some of our markets, we stumbled quite a bit in California and Texas, and the UK and Europe is currently stumbling, and hopefully we can avoid that, but I fear that we may not.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Ellinghaus, we have exhausted our time together. Did you want to do any closing comments?
No, I think we've covered everything. Thank you, Chairman Brown and commissioners, for having me. I appreciate it. And if you do want to make contact and discuss anything, I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Good
much.
time. Appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Well, I can't seem to get out.
Hey, can I still ask you a question or two?
Sure, if you want.
Okay.
I don't know. Are we still recording? Should we not be recording? I don't know.
Oh, it doesn't matter to me. I'm just, if it matters to you, you want me to call you on the phone?
Sure, you can give me a call if you like.
Give me a phone number I can call you.
Sure.